Namaskar and a very pleasant good afternoon to all of you. I, Sangeeta Kaul, on behalf of DELNET Developing Library Network, extends a very warm welcome to each one of you to today's DELNET webinar, which is on remote access to e-resources using Shibboleth and open source software by our distinguished speaker, Dr. Francis Jayakanth, the Scientific Officer at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. It's a profound privilege for me at the very outset to welcome our distinguished speaker of the day, Dr. Francis Jayakanth. Dr. Francis, on behalf of DELNET and on behalf of the entire LIS fraternity and all our attendees over here today, we extend a very warm, hearty welcome to you, and thank you so very much for acceding to our request to be there with us this afternoon and to share your expertise and experience with each one of us on this topic of great significance. Thank you so very much, Dr. Francis.
Thank you. It's my pleasure and honor to be associated with DELNET.
Thank you indeed. I also take immense pleasure in welcoming all the librarians, eminent librarians, library and information science professionals, and officials from the DELNET member institutions. It's also a proud privilege for me to welcome a large number of library and information science professionals who have joined us from various parts of India and also from other countries. I extend a welcome to the HODs and also to the officials, to the computer science and IT departments of various member institutions who have shown a great interest in being a part of this webinar today. I also extend a welcome to the students of the various departments of computer science of our member institutions and also of the various institutions who are there with us today on this webinar on remote access to e-resources using Shibboleth and open source software. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a proud privilege for us to welcome you all today. I extend also a welcome to my own colleagues who have joined us not only from New Delhi, but also from our coordination units at Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Pune. It's an immense pleasure for me to welcome once again our distinguished speaker. I would also like to mention that we have received an overwhelming response to this webinar, and that speaks volumes of the great speaker that we have with us, Dr. Francis Jayakanth, who is practically a person who has immensely been contributed to the field of library and information science for long, and especially in working on a number of very innovative tools and technologies, which holds a great promise and significance for the libraries, and that too for the library and information science professionals. As the topic of today's webinar indicates, remote access to e-resources using Shibboleth and open source software, we all have seen, and the libraries and library and information science professionals have been the one who have always been keen enough to see that how we can ensure an uninterrupted an access to information by our user community, and especially in these extraordinary times. For the past 2 years, one of the most important area in which the library and information science professionals have been working very hard, they have been striving hard to see how to keep the access to information enabled in these extraordinary times. And remote access is the one which is the key, which holds the very key in order to ensure that we are able to offer our resources and services to our user community. The reason for DELNET in organizing this webinar, as we are fully being aware with the fact that yes, the libraries across the spectrum, whether they are in India or even outside, the institutions, the institutional administrators, and especially the library and information science professionals are encountering this problem, that how really to ensure a smooth access to information, wherein our user community, they are not being there in the campuses. The campuses are all being run online. The digital learning, the e-learning is being happening for the last more than 2 years. And now the greater responsibility on library and information science professionals that we are able to reach out to our users wherever they are, and also to take our resources and services on 24/7 in a remote manner. The very purpose for doing this specific webinar and to have our distinguished speaker, Dr. Francis Jayakanth, with us is to make you all aware about this wonderful tool which belongs to an open source community, Shibboleth. And as our distinguished speaker has done enormous work in this field, we felt that it's quite essential for us to make you all sensitized about this Shibboleth, which is an open source tool and which can help you in enabling the remote access to the e-resources. I have profound privilege in welcoming Dr. Francis Jayakanth once again to this online platform today, and I have immense pleasure in introducing him to each one of you. Dr. Jayakanth holds a PhD from the Department of Library and Information Science, Bangalore University, MLISc from University of Madras, and BSc from Bangalore University. He joined the National Center for Science Information, NCSI of Indian Institute of Science, way back in the year 1986 and worked there till April 2012. After the merger of NCSI with the JRD Tata Library at Indian Institute of Science, he worked there from April 2012 to June 2014. From 2014 till 2016, April, Dr. Francis worked as a librarian, Center and Technical Services at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. From April 2016 till present, he is working at the JRD Tata Memorial Library as a scientific officer. His areas of work interest includes open access, proponent and practitioner, digital libraries, interoperability standards and implementation, content management systems, copyright compliances, cloud computing infrastructures, e-resource lifecycle management, in Institute of Science Office of Data Management. Dr. Jayakanth has been a visiting Fulbright Professional Fellow at the old Dominican University, Norfolk in Virginia in USA during 2014-15. He was also the recipient of the inaugural International Award for Promoting and Practicing Open Access in the Developing Countries, instituted by the Electronic Publishing Trust in UK. Dr. Francis Jayakanth is a founder trustee of NCSI Net Foundation, a registered trust comprising of the erstwhile NCSI staff and alumni, and ex-honorary vice president of Color. It's a profound privilege for me to welcome you once again, Dr. Jayakanth. Thank you so very much indeed for sparing time for us and for being there with us this afternoon. Each one of us really look forward to hearing your intellectual talk on the topic, which is indeed everyone is looking forward now to listening to you. I won't like to stand between you and our attendees who are really desperate enough to now hear from you. I welcome you, Dr. Jayakanth, once again to this webinar, and thank you so very much for taking out time for us this afternoon. It's over to you, Dr. Francis.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta, madam. And it's a pleasure and honor for me to have accepted the invitation to deliver this lecture. And I would like to thank you and all the members of the DELNET fraternity for giving me this opportunity to share my very limited experience in the implementation of Shibboleth and open source software. Okay. So let me, a disclaimer that by no means I'm an expert in the implementation of Shibboleth. Now, Shibboleth, which uses various open standards, specifically the SAML, Security Assertion and Markup Language, is a highly technical piece of software, and it needs one needs to spend enormous amount of time in trying to understand and to make use of the full potential that it offers. So I would like to again stress at this point in time that accessing online resources through Shibboleth IDP is just one component of what Shibboleth can facilitate. Okay, so Shibboleth can be used for various other purposes, and as I said, we need to have a dedicated team, preferably an IT team, for the implementation, management, and administration of Shibboleth in an institute. Now, our institute, although we had various other mechanisms to facilitate offline access to online resources, Shibboleth, typically it's implemented in most of the Western universities and in developing countries, and even in our own countries, it's mostly managed by the IT team. But during the extraordinary situation that we all landed up during the pandemic and its aftermath, library was in fact forced to set up an alternative mechanism for facilitating offline access to online resources. So that's when we um, decided to implement this tool. So what I'm trying to convey is that I'm not an expert by any means in the implementation of Shibboleth, and this is just one component of my day-to-day activities at the Institute, and I've not been able to spend a lot more time that I would like to have to get a better knowledge of Shibboleth, and then also to extend its implementation in the campus for various other purposes as well, apart from what is it being used for now, that is the accessing online resource management. Okay, so as I said, it's nearly about 2 years since we implemented this software tool for predominantly for facilitating online access to subscribed online resources from off-campus locations for our user community. Okay. Now, based on the implementation that we did sometime in April, May of 2020, we also shared our experience by writing a case study paper kind of a thing, and it was published in Information Technology and Libraries, which is an open access journal. So any of you who would like to wish to read this paper, you're welcome to do so. And then, as I said, this talk will be mostly based on our experience in implementing the software at the library where I've been working. Okay, so these are the main points that I will be covering during the course of my talk. So a very brief introduction, and then what is the current state of authentication mechanisms that the libraries offer to its user community, both from on-campus and from off-campus, and what technologies are being used. I will be touching upon predominantly one or two technologies because as we know, technologies keep evolving, and different publishers and different institutions opt for different technologies, both for on-campus and off-campus. So I will be talking in terms of what is being used in my institute, and probably a tool which is quite popular with other libraries and institutions as well. Okay, and then we will talk about Shibboleth, okay, which is used for facilitating federated access through single sign-on. Okay, so we will quickly try to understand what single sign-on is and how this single sign-on technology can be extended not only within the within an organization, but across the organization and across distributed organization and disparate various different types of organization, how this single sign-on technology can be made use of. Okay, and then having implemented Shibboleth the software, how does one actually facilitate access to Shibboleth enabled resources? So I will be briefly touching upon that. So and then what benefits does federated access hold? Okay, so these are the broadly what I intend to cover. And as Madam has suggested, you can raise your questions in the chat box, and we'll try to spend more time in trying to understand in exchanging views and clarifying your doubts, if at all I'm able to. Okay, now this is the institute's main building, the institute where I work, the Indian Institute of Science. This is the iconic building which houses the administrative offices of the director, the registrar, and the various deans and various divisional chairs. Okay, So institute, as we know, is an institution of eminence which came into existence in 1909. It started with 2 departments, and library was the first central facility that was started after the commencement of the first 2 departments. In fact, library started functioning from this very building, on the first floor of this building, and it continued to work from this building for nearly about 50 years. So today, Institute has grown, and there are more than 40 departments and centers.
Dr. Francis, we are not able to hear you. Dr. Francis, we are not able to hear you.
Distributed across 6. There are about close to 500 members. 50% are in research. Sorry.
It's fine. Now
Carrying
it's
out. Being a institute of higher education. Okay. Okay. Carrying out research in science, technology, design, and management. So this is the JRD Tata Memorial Library, the front view of the library. This is where presently the library operates from. We moved to this building back in 1965, and till then, as I said, we were operating from the main building of the Indian Institute of Science. Now, IISc Library, as many of you may be aware, holds a rich collection because the collection has been developed over a period of more than 11 decades now. So it has close to 500 volumes of printed materials, both in terms of bound volumes of journals, textbooks, reference materials, standards, technical reports, theses and dissertations. Okay. Now, library, apart from offering traditional library services, also offers various IT related service. Now, library offers institutional repository services for the research publications of our institute. The institute publishes more than 3,000 research papers in the top quality international journals. So the library maintains the institutional repository for the institute publications. Institute also has a separate repository for the thesis and dissertations of the institute. Now, institute produces close to about 300 or 350, about close to 350 theses every year. The other services offered by the library includes the faculty profiles service. Now, all the faculty members of the institute have their profiles on the IRNS platform. The profile basically gives the research productivity of every faculty members on the campus. So apart from these, various other services are also offered, and then we get a lot of walk-in users, being our collection being quite rich. A lot of researchers and faculty members from across the country come to the library for reference services. Okay, coming to the topic, remote access using Shibboleth. Okay. Now we are all aware that the libraries invest substantially, quite heavily in online resources. And then when we subscribe to online resources, invariably the libraries or the institute heads enter into a license agreement with the service provider or the content provider. Now, the license agreement will have various clauses, and basically the terms and condition of the services being offered by the service provider. And then one of the important point, or one of the important clauses that we will have as part of the license agreement is the authorized users, the people who are authorized to use the content that is being licensed. Okay. So every time a user accesses a subscribed online resource, the institution or the library has a contractual and ethical obligation to determine some minimum amount of information about the user. Okay, so this minimum amount of minimum amount of information that is gathered about the user is passed on to the content provider, and the content provider makes a decision based on that information that is being sent from the institute or from the library. Okay, now since mid 90s or late 90s, it's not only libraries and other organizations. They have relied extensively on the IP addresses for as an authentication, as the minimum information that is being passed to the content provider. And based on the IP address that is being passed to the content provider takes a decision to grant access to the licensed content. Okay, so that's the when a user accesses subscribed content, the IP address goes to the content provider, and the content provider, based on the IP address that the content provider recognizes, allows access to the resource. Now, authentication based on IP address is a simple and effective mechanism when people are on the campus. Okay, so now I'm on the campus, and when I access any resource, subscribed resource, my IP address is sent to the publisher, and then because our institute's IP addresses are registered with the various service providers with whom we have a license agreement, I automatically gain access to the resource. So this arrangement works very well as long as the users are confined to the campus or even within the library, which obviously in most of the cases will be within the campus. Okay. Now the question is, what happens when users are away from the campus and when users are on the move, and is it possible to provide same kind of seamless experience to the end users so that they are able to access the subscribed online resources as they would when they are on the campus? Okay. Now, this mechanism, this authentication based on IP address, okay, it works for off-campus access as well, but it needs some kind of workaround. So the same mechanism of sharing the IP address of the institute or of an organization to the publisher is possible even when the users are away from the campus, but it needs a little bit of workaround. And sometimes the workarounds may not be very smooth, and in the process, it can have a negative effect on the user's experience. So that is quite possible. Okay. And another disadvantage, and it can be both advantage as well as disadvantage as well. The advantage is that when the authentication happens based on IP address, no information, the privacy about the user is totally maintained. Okay, so the username or the user's email address, all those things are protected. So the privacy is completely protected when authentication happens based on the IP. On the other hand, when this can also be sometimes a disadvantage, because sometimes what happens is, especially in an academic environment where thousands of students are there, sometimes there is a systematic downloading happening from a particular site. Okay, so what happens is, when such a thing happens, the publisher automatically shuts off the access, or that particular IP address from where the systematic downloading happened, that IP is blocked. So that in the process affects the other people on the campus as well. Okay, so that can be a disadvantage, and it is quite possible to trace back to the system from where the systematic downloading happen. But then it's not guaranteed that the person to whom that system is assigned is the person behind the systematic downloading. Any of his friends or any other person from the lab or the department could have momentarily or for a brief period used that system and could have downloaded. Okay, so identifying the exact person behind systematic download can be difficult in an IP authenticated environment. Okay, so as I said, there are various options both for on-campus and off-campus access to subscribed online resources. And EBSCO, it lists more than different, how many, about 13 different types of authentication mechanisms. So if you visit this link that I have given here, so it lists all the other, all possible authentication and authorization mechanism that can be used to gain access to EBSCO. EBSCO, as we know, is a prominent vendor. Okay, they provide databases and full text resources as well. So in order to access EBSCO resources, they have listed more than 10, in fact, about 13 or so, I think. 13 different ways by which one can use the authentication technology to gain access, not only while being on the campus, but from remote access or off-campus access as well. So now this is only with respect to EBSCO. Okay, now we know that there are hundreds and thousands of content providers or the publishers. Now, same may not be true across all the publishers. Okay, so this is just to give an example that there are various authentication mechanisms, and EBSCO as a vendor supports about 13 different types of authentication methods, and the same is not true across the publishers. Okay, so on-campus access is not an issue at all, and most of the libraries which are part of a campus and campuses having a campus-wide network, and so on-campus access to subscribed resources is not a problem for as far as library and the end users are concerned, and users are quite accustomed and familiar in accessing online resources when they are on the campus, because they don't have to do anything. So as long as they are on the campus and when their devices is on the campus network, and because the campus's IP addresses are registered with various content providers, so users seamlessly access those resources. So when they are away from the campus, and especially what happened after March 2020, when all of us were confined and were expected to work from home, and especially for research students and researchers, okay, who depend heavily on accessing the latest content or the
Dr. Francis, I'm sorry, we are not able to hear you.
published peer reviews are greatly impacted as far as accessing scholarly literature is concerned. When they are kind of experience that they would have while being on the campus. Okay, so what is that they expect? They expect that they're seamlessly able to access all the subscribed online resources, and such accesses should be secure. And then, and as far as the library is concerned, library and the institute is concerned, only authorized users are able to use subscribed content either from on campus or from off campus. So as I said, IP authenticated mechanisms work well for off-campus access as well, but it needs some kind of workarounds. And as I said in my introductory remark, sometimes the workarounds that are needed to implement off-campus through IP authentication can negatively affect the user experiences. Okay. So I've just listed two possibilities, the virtual private networks and proxy servers. Okay. So as I said, there are the technologies keep evolving, and just to cite the example of EBSCO, they support nearly 13 different ways of accessing online resources, both from on campus and off campus. But I've listed just two. So by no means this is exhaustive, and I've listed these two because it is for one thing, we use one of the mechanisms, that is the virtual private network in our institute, and then it is also used various other institutes of higher education and research, and then the proxy servers are also quite popular, and both these technologies are in use for nearly more than 2 decades now. And both these technologies, the virtual private network and the proxy server, they are again IP authenticated. So when the accesses to the resources, the content provider's resource goes from the end user, either they are on campus or off campus. So when they're using VPN, I mean VPN predominantly, or the proxy server is used predominantly when people are away from the campus. Okay, so when they are away from the campus and when they try to use subscribed online resource, they first get connected to the VPN server or the proxy server, and what exactly goes to the content provider is the IP address of the user. Okay, so although they are away from the campus, because they get connected to the VPN server or the proxy server, and these servers are on the network of the campuses, the actual IP that goes to the content provider is the IP address of the institute. Okay. Okay. So the VPN and the proxy servers, okay, now these two technologies, as I said, it's quite popular, and it's been in use for nearly 2 decades now. Okay, now even single sign-on. Okay, now single sign-on is also probably it's in use for more than a decade now. Okay, so single sign-on is a mechanism wherein you sign in to your let's take the example of now every organization will have their email server. Okay, so once I log into my email server, so I will have login credentials. When I log into my email server, so I've logged in once, so that login is good enough for me to access all the other network-based services on the campus network. Okay, now for example, I've logged into my I'll just show a screen here. Now I've logged into my email account. Is my screen visible?
Very much, Dr. Francis.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Now, for example, I have logged in. Now this is a service. Now this is a service offered by our institute. So this service is called as administrative service request. So if I have any administration related service request, I don't have to send an email to the concerned section. So I log into this website and then raise my service request, and it goes to the appropriate section or the department, and they will follow it up. Okay, now this is again I need to log into this service or this website, but I don't have to, because I've already logged into my email, and the same email authentication is also configured for a different service. Okay, and it recognizes it recognizes my login. It recognizes that I've already logged in, and then it doesn't prompt for login again. So I can just continue in accessing. Now this is just one simple example. Okay, so likewise, any campus, okay, will offer various services which are all network-based services. So if a particular organization has implemented single sign-on, then just logging in once into the single sign-on system, or basically logging into our email server, is good enough to access all the other services that are made available to the campus community. So this is just a simple example of single sign-on. Okay, so as I said, all these years, okay, now we know for nearly 2 decades now, more than 2 decades rather, people are used to accessing subscribed online resources on the publisher's platform. Okay, now the virtual private network, okay, which basically facilitates people to access subscribed online resources from away from the remote locations. Okay, now that has been in use on the IISc campus for nearly 2 decades now. Now, typically, this is a scenario. Now this is the network boundary perimeter of the campus, and when I'm away from the institute's network, so what I do, I need to connect to my VPN server. A student or a faculty who is away from the campus network, they connect to the VPN server. So now VPN server is basically a server running a software. So in our case, we are using Cisco VPN server. So I need a client. Client, there are open source clients available. So I install a client, and then using a client, I connect to my VPN server. So once the connection is established, now I'm part of the IISc network, and then I will be able to access all the network services offered from the offered by the by the library or by my organization. Okay, and so one of the important things for which the VPN server is used is for accessing online resources. Now, these could be the various content providers, basically publishers exposing their content, and then when I get connected to the campus VPN server, so I'm dynamically assigned an IP address that is in the range of my institute. So, and then when I access any of the online resources, the IP address that is reflected is the one that is already registered with the publisher, and that's how the end user who is away from the who is away from the campus, is able to access subscribed online resources. So this is through VPN. Okay. Now, what happens here in this case? A VPN client has to be installed. Okay, and then when we access the VPN server, I use my email credentials. I use my email login and password to get connected to the VPN server. Okay, so that's a requirement. Now, all the students and faculty members, they get at the time of creation of their email addresses, then their access to VPN is also enabled. But it's not so for all the other types of other categories of people who are part of the IISc. For example, there will be project assistants, there will be research assistants, there will be JRFs, postdocs. So there are various types of people who are also directly or indirectly engaged in carrying out research, and all those people's needs are to be taken into consideration. So when people in 2020, when people were forced to work from homes, many of other than faculty and students, they were not able to have VPN connection. Either it was not enabled for their email credentials, or they were not aware of it. Okay, so that's when library received several, I would say in hundreds, requests about how to access online resources remotely. Okay, so now we will come back to this. So this is how our user community access online resources when they are away from the campus. Okay, so some limitations of VPN-based access. So as I said, IP authentication leaves very little trace of exactly who is using the resources. that the library pays for. Okay, so although it's possible to trace back the access to a particular IP address or the particular MAC number associated with the IP number, now the exact user who access that system to access the resource, it's difficult to identify. Okay, and then in order to access online resources through the VPN server, so as I showed in the previous slide, people have to get connected to the VPN server, and then the number of simultaneous accesses that one can have on the VPN server depends on the number of licenses that the institute has procured. So this is definitely a finite number. So I'm not sure how many licenses we have. Okay, but then the more the license, the additional money that we need to pay, and this is a recurring cost. So usually on an annual basis, the institute will have an AMC, and then we need to renew the AMC, and also in case there is a need to enhance the number of licenses, then we may also have to pay for the additional licenses. Okay, so there is a recurring cost involved here, and then when too many people when there are too many simultaneous connections on the VPN server, there could be a degradation of the degradation service in terms of the throughput that the VPN server provides. Okay, so this so as I said, the connectivity speed will depend on how many people have simultaneously logged in. So EZ proxy. So offline access to subscribed online resources is also possible through web proxy. And then there are a number of software tools that are available. And EZ proxy is one of the very early entrants in this technology. So EZ proxy now I think it's marketed by, I mean, it is maintained and maintained by OCLC, and there are a lot of agencies which provide support for EZ proxy. So EZ proxy is again an IP-based mechanism. So when institutes or libraries implement EZ proxy or any other tool, okay, which acts as a web proxy, okay. So basically, they log in with their email credentials into the EZ proxy server, and then all the requests that are going from the EZ proxy will reflect the IP address of the EZ proxy, and EZ proxy itself, being on the campus network, will reflect the IP address of the institute. So thereby, the end users who are away from the campus are able to access subscribed online resources through EZ proxy. So the limitations that I talked about with the VPN should also hold good for EZ proxy as well. Okay, so as I said, when most of our user community were away from the campus and they were forced to work from home, and library was pleasantly surprised that not everyone was able to gain access to online resources through the VPN server. That's when we realized that VPN access is not by default given to all categories of employees on the campus. So as I said, the students and the faculty members are by default at the time of creation of their email addresses are also given access to the VPN server. But the same thing is not true for other categories of people who are associated with IISc. So they constitute quite a good percentage of people working on the campus. Okay, so all those people were not able to access online resources, and even amongst the faculty members, some faculty members preferred not to use VPN server. I'm not sure, I won't be able to comment on that, why they were not willing to use VPN server. So they were asking the library to provide alternative mechanism for accessing online resources. Okay, so so we had a discussion, and then we decided to, and the implementation of Shibboleth was also was there on the back of our minds, but then somehow it was not happening. And this was the opportunity that we were forced to implement. And it was sort of blessing in disguise for the library, because we were been wanting to implement a single sign-on based solution for accessing online resources. And then in 2020 we were sort of forced to implement it because of the demand exercised by our user community. Okay, so there were so after the brainstorming, so we decided that federated access through Shibboleth identity provider is a possible solution, and that's what we implemented in April 2020, and it's been working quite satisfactorily since then. Okay. Now, I talked about now federated access. Now let's try to understand what federated access is. Now we understood what single sign-on is. Now single signing on is a mechanism wherein you log in once with your email credentials, and that login entails you to access other services on the network. So single sign-on, as I said, can be used within a campus. Okay, a campus can offer various services on the network, and then if authentication is needed for these services, then and if it is being integrated with single sign-on, then signing on once is good enough, and that enables us to access all the other services on the network. Okay, now that is as far as a single campus is concerned. Now an organization can have a single campus or multiple campuses. Okay, and then especially in the context of libraries, we license content from various publishers. Now, for example, we subscribe to resources from nearly 70 different publishers. Okay, so every publisher will have their own platform. Okay, so now federated access is extending that single sign-on across the various organization or across various entities. So for example, um, as I said, the library has a license agreement with 70 publishers. Okay, so the single sign-on, okay, that the Shibboleth which supports a single sign-on. Okay, so I sign in to my email credentials once, and then that single sign-on is good enough for me to access resources spread across 70 or 80 or whatever the number is across the globe. Okay, so that's what the federated access is all about. Now, there are various candidates in terms of software which support single sign-on, federated access based on single sign-on. Okay. Now, in our context, the two popular ones being Shibboleth and OpenAthens. Okay. Now, Shibboleth is an open source software, and OpenAthens also uses open standards. Okay, but it's a service provided at a cost. Now, OpenAthens now is part of JISC, okay, and there are various vendors who support OpenAthens, and it's purely a cloud-based service. It's a cloud-based service, and we need to have a license agreement in order to use OpenAthens. Okay. On the other hand, Shibboleth it's not a centralized service like OpenAthens. Shibboleth is implemented by individual institutions. For example, our institute has implemented it, and various other IITs and other NITs may have implemented it, and it is implemented at the institute level, and it's an open source software, and it does not involve any recurring cost whatsoever. Okay, so all that we need is one computer hardware, a computer with minimal hardware. Okay, any desktop system should be good enough. A system with 4 GB of RAM and about 200 or 250. It doesn't actually require too much of space as well. Okay, so any entry level system, excuse me, any entry level system is good enough to implement a Shibboleth IDP software. Okay, now the option that we had was either to use OpenAthens. Okay, so now all that we had to do was to enter into license agreement and then complete few formalities. We could have done that, but then that involves the recurring cost, the annual license renewal cost. So we decided to go with Shibboleth for the reasons listed here, to avoid the recurring cost associated with OpenAthens solution. And then there is a federation. Okay, now there is a federation which is being maintained by the InflibNet. Okay, now now this is the only federation as of now in the country, and worldwide there are about 60 federations. So in our country, InFeed is a Shibboleth based federation. Okay. Okay, so we'll talk about the role the InFeed plays. Okay, and and another important thing is InFeed is part of EduGain. Okay, now EduGain is a federation of federations. Now, as I said, there are about 60 or more than 60 federations across the globe. Okay, now most of the countries have one federation. Okay, now there are exceptions. There are a couple of countries which have more than one federation. But as I've seen, most of the countries have one federation, and these federations are all part of EduGain. Okay, so EduGain is an interfederation. Okay, it's an interfederation, and InFeed being part of EduGain or any other federation being part of EduGain gains to stand. So it's always, I mean, if a country has a federation, surely it will be part of EduGain, okay, which is an interfederation. So coming back to Shibboleth, Shibboleth is an open source software package for web single sign-on across or within an organization boundary. So as I said, so we can implement Shibboleth and facilitate single sign-on for network-based services that an organization offers, and that can be limited to the organizational boundary, or it can be across the organization, which is spread across different parts of the globe. Okay, now Shibboleth implements various open standards, but the most important standard that it implements is called as the SAML. So SAML stands for Security Assertion and Markup Language. Okay, now in order to gain a good mastery over Shibboleth and to understand how it works, how to tweak it, how to make the best use of Shibboleth. So as I said, one needs to have a good understanding of this SAML standard. Okay, so if one wants to implement Shibboleth for other than accessing the online resources, then one needs to spend a lot of time in understanding this standard. Okay. So what happens when we implement Shibboleth is that we authenticate ourselves through the organizational credentials. So once we authenticate ourselves once, and then that authentication is good enough to access all the other services which we are entitled to access, and the services which also recognize or which are Shibboleth enabled services. Okay, so I think this will be a better. The same thing is diagrammatically represented here. Okay, now there are two different components in Shibboleth. So one is the identity provider and the other is the service provider. Okay. Now basically what we have implemented at our library is the Shibboleth IDP. Okay. So there are two software components as part of the Shibboleth. Okay. One is the identity provider and other is the service provider. Now all the service providers, in our case, they're all publishers. Now all the publishers would have implemented Shibboleth service provider software, and all the libraries or the organizations or institutions, they would have implemented Shibboleth IDP. And as I said, we can also become a service provider within an organization. Okay, so because the entire software suite is open source, so we can implement either of this. But for our purpose, IDP, Shibboleth IDP is good enough. So what happens typically? Now, here is a user who is away from the campus, and he's trying to access licensed control. He's trying to access licensed resource. Okay, so he goes to, let's say this is a publisher, so he accesses the publisher's resource. Okay, now many of you will be familiar that when we are accessing from off campus, and then when we are not going through either VPN or EZ proxy or whatever it is. Okay, so we are accessing just as we would access any other site. Okay, but in this case, this is a restricted access. The content that the publisher holds, okay, only the license holders will be able to access. Now, when we are not coming through VPN or EZ proxy, and we are just accessing it while being away from the campus, and then it will prompt for login. So this we are all very familiar with, and you would have also noticed that there will be institutional login. You would have come across institutional login. Okay, so if your institute has implemented Shibboleth IDP, then when you click on institutional login, okay, there are a few steps involved there. Now we will see the screenshots of those. Okay. Now let's assume that this user, okay, he's visiting, first visits a library site, and the library site lists all the resources that are accessible using Shibboleth IDP. So he follows one of the links for, let's say, American Chemical Society, and then he's directed to he follows that link and goes to American Chemical Society. Okay, American Chemical Society understands that this is Shibboleth based access coming, and then it needs authentication. Okay, so what it does, for the authentication, it sends back the user to the Shibboleth. Now this is the Shibboleth IDP. Now this is where this is a computer system on which the Shibboleth IDP software has been installed. Okay. So the American Chemical Society redirects the user to log into the identity provider service. Okay. Now, if I've already logged in, okay. So, for example, in my case, now I'm sitting here on the campus. I've already logged in. Then it doesn't prompt for me to log in again. Then it passes some attributes back to the service provider, and in this case it is ACS. So ACS recognizes the attributes that was passed by the Shibboleth IDP, and then it allows access to the end user. Okay, now the authentication, now the authentication authentication can be implemented within the Shibboleth IDP, but in our case what happens, they are, for authentication we make use of Microsoft email server. Okay, so I've already logged into for my official email onto the Microsoft email server. Okay, and then so what, in case if I'm accessing from off campus and if I've not logged in, so I'll be redirected to my email server, and the email server will expect me to log in. And once I successfully log in, the email server passes some attributes to the IDP. IDP in turn passes that back to the service provider. So typically this is what happens. Okay, so a service provider detects user attempting to access a restricted content within the resource. Okay, so this is a service provider. The service provider generates an authentication request. So an authentication request is generated and sends the request and the user to the user's IDP. So as I said, the authentication can happen within the IDP server itself, or it can be happening externally as well. Okay. Okay, so the IDP authenticates the user, then sends the authentication response and the user back to the service provider. The service provider verifies the IDP's response and sends the request through to the resource, which returns the originally requested content. So in this case, it will be mostly because it's trying to user is trying to access online resource, a PDF will be opened to the end user. Okay, now so let's try to understand the role played by the federation. Okay, so now Access Managed Federation or the federation. Okay, now I touched upon InFeed. Now InFeed is a federation, so it's an access management federation in the country. Okay, now it provides a trust framework in which identity providers. Now ours is an identity provider, Shibboleth IDP or the Shibboleth identity provider. Okay, so it enables a trust. Now there are various parties involved now. So in a federated access, various parties are involved. Now individual libraries or institutions would have implemented Shibboleth IDP. Okay, and there are various content providers. Now it could be in hundreds or it can be in thousands. Okay, now the federation, okay, the federation establishes a trust framework between the service providers and the individual identity providers, and they agree to policies for sharing of encrypted user information to provide easy access to online content. So members of a federation share metadata files, establishing trusted connection between libraries and publishers. So when I set up an IDP server, Shibboleth IDP server, a metadata file is generated. So that's an XML file and with some encrypted content. Now I need to share this metadata XML with the federation. So in our case, it is the InFeed. So I will share my details about my IDP with the federation. Now in this case, it is InFeed. Now again, the various publishers, okay, with whom we access information from. Okay, now these publishers would also have shared their metadata details, and those details are available on the on our federation. Now here it is InFeed. Okay, so now the service providers. Now service providers will, for example, in our case, publishers will be frequently checking for the existence of IDP, okay, on the InFeed site. Okay, now if InFeed for some reason removes IISc metadata from their server, then there is no way that our people will be able to access the online resources through Shibboleth. Okay, so because we are part of the InFeed and because we are going through InFeed, it's very important that the InFeed maintaining the trust framework, it is up and running all the time. Okay, now this is just to give an example what happens in the absence of a federation. Now let's assume that if InFeed were not to be InFeed service were not to be available in the country. Okay, now this could be IISc and various other institutions in the country, and these are the various publishers with whom these institutions have subscribed content from. Okay, now when I set up my IDP server, now I need to share my metadata and I need to give my details to all the publishers. Okay, so now there it could be 50, 100, or whatever the number is. Okay, now similarly, each and every institute will need to do the same thing. Okay, so that involves tremendous amount of work and time. Okay, so on the other hand, uh, when we go through a federation, when the federation service is available, okay, the trust between the service provider and the individual identity provider is established by the federation. And federation is again, there is a process involved to become a federation, and federation will be part of EduGain, which I said is a federation of federations. And then being part of the federation, we also stand to gain access to the services that are made available through EduGain or other federations which are part of EduGain, and that are made accessible only to academic and educational institution through single sign-on. Okay, and otherwise it could be a licensed resource, but there are resources which are freely made available through single sign-on, but we need to be part of a federation. Now, in the presence of a federation, now this is the advantage we stand to gain. So I set up my Shibboleth IDP server, and then I share my metadata details with a federation of my country, and similarly various other service providers who are part of they share their metadata, and the trust is established between the IDP, that is Shibboleth uh, identity providers, and Shibboleth service providers through the intervention of the federation. Okay, so when I set up my Shibboleth identity provider, I share my details of my identity provider with the federation that is part of my country, and then the service they in turn share it with the service provider, and the service provider will periodically keep checking that that we are part of this federation. So just briefly about InFeed. Now, a federation is merely list of metadata entries aggregated from their member IDPs and their service providers. So as I said, and I have pointed out, so we all are IDPs. Now we are identity providers. Okay, we are identity providers, Shibboleth identity providers, and we would have shared our metadata details with InFeed. Okay, and the service providers would have also shared their metadata details with InFeed, and it's the InFeed which actually establishes the trust between the IDPs and the service providers. Okay, manages the trust relationship between, okay, therefore the individual IDPs intend to facilitate. Okay, so because we are part of the federation, though we don't have to deal with the publishers independently. Okay. Okay, so every region has its own federation. Every region has its federation. Some of the uh, now in common is one which is popular in North America, and then as I said, the UK has its own federation. Okay, and every country has many countries have their own respective federations. So it's if there is a federation, it's in a country, it's always a good idea to go through the federation rather than dealing with the service provider or the content providers individually. Now these are the details. Now suppose if I have to deal with individual publishers individually. So apart from that XML file that I was referring to, I need to share the entity name. Now these are all I was referring to, that SAML, security assertion and markup language, and it has got various attributes, and here are the 3 or 4 attributes that I have listed. Now, for example, entity name. Okay, so this is an attribute, and then wherein you give the name of the institution. Now, entity ID. Now, this is the location where the Shibboleth IDP is accessible. This is the domain name of the Shibboleth IDP server. Then the EduPerson scoped affiliation. Okay. Uh, now, within an institution, there are various categories of users. So they could be faculty members, they could be student, they could be staff, or there will be so many other categories. Now it's not difficult. I mean, it's not quite possible to have a specific name for those categories, for every category that exists. So these categories are quite straightforward. But for other categories, we can either assign that they are member of IISc.ac.in or they are user at this. That's what will be sent to the publisher. So when we send to the publisher, it's quite possible to say that we are sending a request is coming from faculty, but we don't specify who the faculty is. So that's just the information that is sent. So a particular user who is accessing is faculty at IISc.ac.in, or it could be a student at IISc.ac.in. So the privacy is totally maintained here. Okay. So full name, first name, last name, email address, nothing is shared with the service provider. Okay. Now, which federation that we are part of? Okay. So these are the details apart from the XML file that I was referring to that we need to share with the individual service providers. And then, so when we go through a federation, for example, in feed, then we don't have to share this individually with the service providers. So we share this once with the federation, and the federation in turn shares this with all the service providers. Okay. Now let's come to the practical example. Now what we have done, there are more than one way to access Shibboleth enabled resource. Now now this link now what we did after completing the installation. Okay, now there is a lot of configuration related thing that needs to be done. Okay, now it's not just a simple installation of the software that will enable Shibboleth based access to online resources. Okay, now there is good amount of configuration that needs to be done. Okay, and then so we need to involve InflibNet. Okay, so we need to involve InflibNet. In our case, InflibNet helped us in configuring the Shibboleth IDP server, and then we need to interact with our network support team. Okay, because Shibboleth IDP server has to interact with the Microsoft email server. Okay, so there is some amount of configuration that needs to be done on the email server. Okay, and then there has to be a communication that happens between the Shibboleth IDP server and the Microsoft email server. And in our case, the Microsoft email server is on the Azure cloud platform. Okay, so there is involvement of the network support team, and their support and help is very much needed. Okay, and then we are part of InFeed, so we need to take help from InFeed as well. Okay, so once all the configuration that was done, okay, so we created a page, resources page, which lists all the major publishers which are accessible through Shibboleth IDP. Okay, now these are all, now this covers almost 85 to 90% of subscriptions. Now other subscriptions are not part of this list because those resources are not yet accessible through Shibboleth. Okay, now what happens is when let's say I access ACM digital library. So now let's assume that I'm accessing from remote access, and then I've already logged into my email server. So these are the three pieces of information that is which are also encrypted. Okay, except this part, which are sent to the service provider. Okay, so the domain is sent, and that I'm a member of IISc.ac.in. Okay, and then my actual email address is encrypted. Okay, so it is not sent to the publisher. Okay, so this page will appear, and then I will accept this. And then I'm on the ACM digital library platform. Okay, so this okay, now same thing happens when I'm away from the campus. The only difference is a login prompt will come. If I've not already not logged into my email server, a login prompt will come. Now once I've logged into my email server, there is there's no need for me to log into while accessing any of the content from any of the service providers. So I can access all these resources with a single sign-on. Okay, so this is one way of accessing it. Now, if you look into this, the URL behind this link will be quite different. Okay, now the question is, how do you get this URL? So there are two ways that you can get these URLs from. Okay, now one is you can interact with the publisher, and the publisher can share the Shibboleth URL for their resource. The other thing is, I think I don't have a screenshot readily available. There is a service provided by JISC. So we can go there and then generate Shibboleth URL for a particular service. Okay. Now, yeah, this is what I was saying at the beginning. So when we are so when we are away from the campus, and when we try to access a resource, because we are not within the IP range of our institute, so I'm trying to access subscribed content, and this institutional login will come. So you click on the institutional login, and then it tells us to identify the federations that we are part of. So we select InFeed as our federation, and then within InFeed, what are all the various institutes that are already part of. Okay, so I select my Indian Institute of Science, and then what happens? It will uh, the login screen will come. This is because I've not logged into my email server. Okay, so I can go to a resource which we have licensed to, and then do an institutional login, and then it will take you to the institutional login service. And once we log in, then we are good to go and access the subscribed resource from the service provider. Okay, now this approach is called as uh, 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 not this yeah, this approach is called as where are you from. So when I go to a publisher site and I've not logged into my email credentials, and I'm trying to access a resource, so it wants to know where am I from. So that's the reason why it asks for my federation, and then the institution within a federation, and then to to the login credentials. Okay. Now, on the other hand, when we saw this when we logged into the ACM using this page. Now this is called as waveless access, that is WAYL. Where are you from less? So it doesn't ask us where am I from. Okay, so when I click on this, and if I've logged in, I've directly given access to the resource. If I've not logged in, it prompts me to log in. Okay, so it doesn't ask me to recognize the federation that I'm part of, or the institution that an institution that is part of the federation. Okay, so this is called as waveless URLs. Okay, so there are several benefits that Shibboleth-based single sign-on federated access offers. So it's an open source software, so there is no recurring cost involved. So we need even the infrastructure needed in terms of computing hardware and all, it's minimal. Um, uh, yeah, that's a big advantage. Um, the single sign-on, as far as the end users are concerned, they get a seamless, secure access to subscribed online content, and they can use this while being on the campus or while being away from the campus. Being a single sign-on system, it eliminates the need to have individual credentials for different online resources. So it uses SAML process for authentication and authorization, which is an open standard and which is an NISO recognized open standard. So it is also implemented by most of the major publishers, or in fact, most of the publishers. Okay, so so it's always a good idea when we are negotiating for content to ensure that we will be able to access the resource that is being negotiated, that it's accessible through Shibboleth. And then because we are already part of federation, and then the amount of time that we need to spend in enabling Shibboleth-based access across various publishers is much lesser, as in the absence, we would be spending a lot more time in gaining access to the publisher's content through Shibboleth. Okay. Now, apart from that, being, as I said, for example, I just give you an example of one example, that is NIH. Now, NIH resources. Now, NIH, when you try to access NIH resource, now it could be some data or it could be some software. Okay. Now now those resources are free, but it expects you to do an institutional login. Okay. So institutional login happens through the federated access. Okay. So apart from subscribed online resources, there are various other resources, including data or storage space, which are linked to institutional login. Okay, so which are based on single sign-on. Okay, so if we have implemented Shibboleth IDP, now we can take advantage of all such services, and it's helpful especially for the user community and also for the researchers. And it's also possible to track the usage. Okay, so it's also possible to get the usage. Okay, so how many times now, this is where, now in case of systematic download and all, now all these are maintained on this Shibboleth IDP server. Okay, so nothing is visible to the publisher. Okay, so the library will be able to analyze as how many times people have logged in. Okay, so in case if somebody has some systematic download has happened at a particular instance of time, so we can see which user was using that resource at a particular instance of time. So because everything gets logged, it's possible to know who has actually downloaded. Okay, so what resources are being used and who is using them. So we get some minimal statistics. Now this is not actually part of Shibboleth IDP software. Now this is a tool which was been developed by InflibNet and has been integrated with Shibboleth IDP. So what it essentially does is, this tool, it takes the log files created by the Shibboleth IDP server and then loads that log file into this tool, and this tool in turn gives some amount of metrics about the usage of Shibboleth IDP. So as I said, the hardware requirement for setting up Shibboleth, okay, is I mean, one need not is minimal. Okay, so in fact, if you have a desktop system with a reasonable configuration, you can get started with it. You don't need to make a heavy investment in terms of hardware infrastructure is concerned. And as I said, a lot of coordination is required both at your organizational end and also at the federation. So just to conclude, the implementation of federated access to subscribed online resources has ensured that all the authorized users of the institute can access almost all licensed resources from wherever they are. Okay, so although we had other mechanisms for online access to remote access to online resources, they had their own limitations. Okay, so with the implementation of Shibboleth, then every user who has an official email ID can be will be able to access subscribed online resources wherever they are. And one good thing that we, as from the library's perspective, what we noticed is that we implemented it in 2020, April, mid 2020. Okay, since then, our usage of online resources has been growing to the extent that in 2021, in 2020 itself, there was a increase by about 20%. And the same pattern was also seen in 2021, about 20 to 25%, more than 25% enhanced access was there as compared to the previous years. So with that, let me conclude, and thank you very much for your patience. Thank you once again to Dr. Kaul and our team for giving me an opportunity to share my limited experience. And I'll be able to take your questions and to the best of my ability. And as I said in the beginning, I'm no way expert in the implementation of Shibboleth IDP. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. And I thank once again Dr. Kaul for the wonderful coordination that she's been doing to ensure that everything falls in line and goes on smoothly. Thank you very much, Dr. Kaul, and thank you very much all the participants and the DELNET team. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Francis Jayakanth, for such a wonderful deliberation, exhaustive deliberations. And I would like to say that it was not a limited knowledge that you possess. You are full of so much of experience as you have set up, this wonderful open source Shibboleth tool. And thank you so much for taking out time in sharing your vast expertise with all our attendees today. Before we make the floor open for question, I would like to, with the permission of all our attendees, would like to ask you a very quick question. And that is, as we all are aware with the fact that not all institutions in the country are users comprising of whether they're the faculty members or they are the students, researchers, and scholars. Not many institutions, they are having their own email servers. They don't have their domain email IDs. So in that case, how this authentication can be possible? Because they are not the premier institutions, we are fully aware, besides that also, but even if we conduct a survey, not everywhere still the faculty members may have an institutional email IDs with them. But if we think about our students who are being there, 6,000 students, 10,000 students in an institution, academic institution, in such a scenario, how can we think about using Shibboleth, and how we can think about having this identity, how the identity would be provided if they are not the single sign-on. In such scenario, yes, how this issue can be tackled?
Yeah. Thank you very much. A very relevant question and appropriate question. And I would like to apologize at this time that I've overshot the time. I didn't notice the time at all. I'm sorry that I was supposed to complete by 4 o'clock and it's nearing 4:30 now. My apologies, sincere apologies for that. Okay, so that's a very pertinent question, and that's a very pertinent question. And as I said, now if you Now, I was giving an example of my institution, okay? Now, wherein we have a dedicated email server and everybody has a dedicated, official email. And okay, now let's assume that this does not exist, okay? Now, what can be done is we can set up a authentication system within the Shibboleth IDP itself. Okay, now Shibboleth IDP server does not provide any mechanism for verifying for authenticating oneself. Okay, so what can be done is some kind of LDAP based authentication. Okay, now LDAP based authentication can be implemented, okay, within this server or within an external server. So what that LDAP server does, it's basically providing login credentials to the authorized users. So we can set up an LDAP server, okay, and create login credentials for all authenticated users, and then Shibboleth IDP will take the credential, will take the attributes passed by the LDAP server and then pass it on to the service provider. Okay, so that's a valid question, and that is very relevant. Still, many institutions do not have their email servers, so that is no way is going to be a limitation or an hindrance as far as the Shibboleth implementation of Shibboleth IDP is concerned. So we can set up our LDAP server, which will act as an authentication system.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis, for clarifying on this. And I think that must have been the question in the minds of many of our attendees, as they belong to the institutions where they still they don't have the email servers running in. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And now, with the permission of our speaker, we would like to make the floor open for questions. The floor is entirely now for our attendees to ask any question, quick questions that you may like to ask to our distinguished speaker. Please raise your digital hand and we'll be really glad to hand over the audio control to you so you can directly converse with our distinguished speaker. We have Mr. Anup Kumar Baram. Please note I'm going alphabetically with your name. So please be patient enough because I'm going from A to Z. So we have Mr. Anup Kumar Baram, who may like to ask a question to our eminent speaker. Mr. Anup Kumar Baram, I have unmuted you. Could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Mr. Anup Kumar Baram, could you please unmute yourself? He's not able to do that. I'm sorry, I have to push to go to the next attendee who's waiting to ask a question to our speaker. Please raise your digital hand on the right-hand side of your screen. We have Dr. Jitendra Kumar Dubey. Dr. Jitendra Kumar Dubey from Haryana Skill University. Yes, Dr. Dubey. Dr. Jitendra, thank you. We are connected. You may ask your question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello,
good
yes.
afternoon, ma'am. And Dr. Francis, sir, good afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Actually, I want to implement Shibboleth in our university. So, how can take steps for subscribe it or implement in our library?
Okay, fine. Yeah, yes, you are encouraged to do that. Now, does your university have a email server?
They do have. Okay. Dr. Dupe is from Haryana Skill University, and they do have an email server. Okay. Dr. Jitendra?
Yeah, no. Even if they don't have, it's not going to be. LDAP, it's not going to come in the way. It's not going to come in the way. So, Dr. Jitendra, yeah, what you need to do is please first try to understand, go to that Shibboleth wiki page, okay, and then just get a basic understanding of what Shibboleth and what it does for you. And then what you need to do is, it's an open source software. It depends on number of other software. Now, for example, it depends on Java, because it's a Java, it's written in Java. Shibboleth is developed in Java. It depends on Java, and then it depends on a Java servlet web server, for example, Tomcat or GT. Okay, and then it also uses backend RDBMS. Okay. Now, all the instructions are given on the wiki page of the Shibboleth. So download the Shibboleth IDP software. Now, I will say that installation of the software itself is quite straightforward. Okay. So once you have all the dependent software installed, now installing the Shibboleth IDP software is just a matter of a couple of minutes. Okay, but then what takes time and what takes coordination with your backend network team, and also if you want to be part of a federation, that needs some, I mean, good amount of coordination with your backend network support team, and then with your federation. Okay, now that's what is going to take time. Now implementing the software itself, I think you should be able to be done with it. Now if you correctly install all the dependent software and then the Shibboleth IDP software itself, that can be done in a matter of a couple of hours. But then to get the software working, okay, then you need to coordination with your network support team, and then you need coordination with the federation. Okay, so I would repeat once again that software installation is quite straightforward, but what takes time is the configuration of the software to work correctly, and then we need to configure the software to release the required attributes as needed by the publishers. For most of the, it's not that each publisher requires different set of attributes. For most of the online resources, one set of attributes that is released for one publisher is good enough for rest of the publishers. Okay, but then integrating with your email server, or if you don't have your email server, then setting up your own authentication server. Okay, so those things may take time. Okay, so as far as installing IDP software is concerned, that is quite straightforward. So I'm not, did I answer your question?
Very much, very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. We have yet another colleague of ours, Dr. Prakash Ayan, the Chief Librarian at Alliance University in Bangalore, who may like to ask you a question. May I request you, Dr. Prakash, you may kindly pose a question.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Sir, I wanted to ask you two questions. One question is, now we also using IDP with help of InflipNet. As you told that we have to install all those things, but as per my knowledge, now if I send an email to InflipNet, they will take care of everything. They will install it. They'll give the service with free service. Okay, we have done from last 4 or 5 years. We are using this IDP, so they are only taking care of everything. Okay, we are not doing anything from our end, but only one problem I'm facing that. Assume that we have around 20 to 30 online databases which we are subscribed from the publisher. Some of the publishers are not ready to join this federation. Like example, some of the international publishers, they say that no, we are not part of Indian Federation. Okay, so you can access either using the username and password or IP based access, but we can't give the service through Shibboleth. So in this case, how to deal with this? Because now recently I have approached some of the publishers. Some publishers say that you subscribe MyLoft. Nowadays the MyLoft also one of the software which is giving remote access service, like Nimbus also one of the product. So they say that if you want to access our product remotely, you have to subscribe MyLoft. Through that you can access, but we are not giving the access through Shibboleth. So like that, many publishers are not ready to give the access, or they don't want to part of Shibboleth. So now assume that in our case we have around 24 databases. You can see idp.alliance.edu.in. I have two parts. First part I have mentioned, these database can be accessed through using your NT login username and password. On another set of product, you can use it using the username and password. For that username and password, they have to send an email us. So this is a little bit difficult to reach all the users. So what is your suggestion as a solution with the publishers who is not ready to join this Indian Federation?
Okay, now fortunately or unfortunately, we have not come across a situation wherein a publisher saying that we are not going to facilitate access because you are part of some specific federation or whatever it is. Now, as long as the content from the publisher is Shibboleth enabled, okay, and that happens to be the case with our subscriptions. So most of our Shibboleth based access, so all the we never had such a problem, and then all the registration of our identity provider was done by the federation, that is the infeed was done. Okay, now as I said, I gave the example of the federation and the role a federation plays as far as acting as a trust partner between the service provider and the identity provider. Now, if a federation were not to be present, then it is still possible to have Shibboleth based single sign-on access to the resources that are Shibboleth enabled. So what you can try with the specific publisher is that first find out whether their content is accessible via Shibboleth IDP at all. If it is not, then there is nothing that one can do about it. Now, if their content is accessible via Shibboleth IDP, and then they don't want to be part of our federation, that is infeed, then you can register your details of your Shibboleth IDP directly with the publisher. So you are directly interacting with the publisher and then getting the Shibboleth based access without the intermediation of infeed. Okay, so that is one possible, and that can happen only if a publisher's content is Shibboleth enabled. So that should be possible. But if the content itself is not Shibboleth enabled, then there is nothing that one can do about it. So it has to be in one of the ways with which the publisher expects you to access, either IP based or whatever it is.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. Now we have Dr. Mamta Kaushik, the Deputy Librarian at Mana Rashna University in Faridabad, who may like to ask a question. It's over to you, Dr. Mamta.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Please ask your question.
I want to know, ma'am, how we can implement this on our library, ma'am. Present, we are subscribed 10 and 15 databases.
Okay.
Dr. Mamta, okay, Dr. Francis, okay. Please.
Yeah. Yes, madam. Now, first of all, please check that whatever databases that you are subscribing to, you need to check with your service provider or the database publisher, and then make sure that these databases can be accessed through the Shibboleth IDP. Now, once you ensure that the databases are accessible through the Shibboleth IDP, then either your institute, okay, now your institute will have an, my suggestion is that it's best done by the IT team itself, okay, because they have access to all the other resources that are needed for the implementation of the Shibboleth IDP. So the library needs to coordinate with the IT team of an institution, okay, and then it would be a better option to make use of the IT expertise that is available in your IT department for the implementation of the Shibboleth IDP. And also, if required, you may have to go through the federation like infeed, as I said. So I've told you what role it plays. Okay. So first, make sure that the databases that you have subscribed to or your institution is subscribing to are all accessible using Shibboleth IDP. And then, if it is so, then please interact with your IT team and ask them to install the software. As I said, the software itself doesn't require any just a moderate system is good enough for the implementation of the Shibboleth IDP system.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. I'm now requesting Dr. G. Sharmila Sharme. Dr. G. Sharmila Sharme, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Dr. G. Sharmila Sharme, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? It seems you're not able to do that. I'm compelled to move to our next attendee. He's waiting to ask the question. I'm just glancing through the list, so please give me a little time. We have Dr. Kasimani C, who may like to ask a question. Dr. Kasimani C. Dr. Kasimani C, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question quickly? Dr. Kasimani C, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Not able to do that. So let me go to our next attendee. We have Madhur Ranthakam Sivakumar. Madhu Ranthakam Sivakumar, who may like to ask a question. I have unmuted you. Please unmute yourself and ask your question. Madhu Ranthakam Sivakumar, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Because of any technical issues, if you're not able to unmute yourself, you can post your question in the chat box. We have Mrs. Mamta Verma who may like to ask a question. Yes, Mamta, we are connected. You may quickly ask your question. Mamta Verma? Mamta? It seems that she was just trying to see that how this digital hand works. So let's go for to Nagaraja AD. Nagaraja AD, could you please unmute yourself? Mr. Nagaraja AD, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Mr. Nagaraja AD, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question? If you're not able to do that, let me go to Dr. Namrata Dobaria. Dr. Namrata Dobaria, could you please unmute yourself? Dr. Namrata Dobaria, could you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we are connected. Yes.
Good
please.
evening. Good evening, all of you. Good evening, Dr. Francis.
Good evening.
We have been also using Shibboleth IDP. I also have the same question like previously asked regarding some publishers as not to be part of the Shibboleth. So we also have been facing the same problem with some of our publishers. So that is the one question. We also try how to deal with them. And the second question is like, does it possible to add Koha or any other opaque link into the IDP or any other open resource link?
Yeah, okay. I've not tried it myself. Okay, now let me, okay. So now, for example, let me give you an example and then I'll come to your specific question. Now, let's say my institute, in our library, we are using ePrint software. ePrints, as you know, it's a digital library software for institutional repository. Okay. Now, ePrints, we can implement. Now, ePrints, as you know, it has got login credentials. Now, if you want to do a self-archiving, or if you want to do a reviewing process, or you want to do a uploading process, you need to log into the ePrint system. Okay. Now, in the absence, now in the normal course, okay, ePrints maintains its own login credentials. So you first generate your login credentials from the ePrint system, which it stores in the backend database, okay, MySQL database or Post or whatever it is. Okay. Now, if ePrints is integrated with Shibboleth, now what does it mean to integrate an existing software to make it Shibboleth compatible? Now, ePrints development team has to generate additional code that is needed in order to make the existing ePrint software to be Shibboleth IDP compliant. Now, ePrints has done that. So that now, if I implement that additional piece of tool that has been developed in order to make ePrint software Shibboleth IDP compliant, then the end users in my institute, okay, they don't have to create login credentials on the ePrint server, because it is Shibboleth IDP enabled, it will rely on their official email addresses. So that is as far as ePrints is concerned. Now you asked about Koha. Now, I've not worked much with Koha, so I'm not sure if Koha is already Shibboleth enabled. If Koha is already Shibboleth enabled, then it should be able to integrate it with your Shibboleth IDP. Now, you were asking specifically whether you can integrate your OPAC with Shibboleth. Now, OPAC is open for everybody, isn't it? Now, OPAC, I can access your OPAC from my institute. I don't need any credentials, isn't it? So, there is no need to make OPAC Shibboleth enabled. But on the other hand, if the Koha interface, okay, now Koha, you use backend jobs, various other backend jobs with Koha. Now, if that is Shibboleth IDP enabled, then you can integrate it with your IDP, okay, and then for login purposes, it will use your official email ID to log into your Koha server. Okay, so my understanding is that as far as OPAC is concerned, you need not integrate it with Shibboleth IDP.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. We have Mr. Naveen Kumar Ralabandi who may like to ask a question. Mr. Naveen Kumar Ralabandi, I have unmuted you. Please unmute yourself and quickly ask your question. Mr. Naveen Kumar Ralabandi, could you please unmute yourself and quickly ask your question? If you're not able to do that, you can post your message, your question in the chat box. We have Mr. Mr. P. Ram Prabhu who may like to ask a question. Mr. P. Ram Prabhu, could you please unmute yourself? Mr. P. Ram Prabhu, if you would like to ask anything, please unmute yourself quickly. If you're not able to do, please post your message, your question in the chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to Mr. Pawan Agrawal. Mr. Pawan Agrawal, could you please unmute yourself? Dr. Pawan Agrawal, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Yes, Dr. Pawan, we are connected right now. Thank you very much for being there.
Good evening, madam. Good evening, Francis sir.
Good evening. Good evening.
I have one question. It is not very technical. It is just I'm asking about that we are using that the federated search and universal search or that discovery. These are the common word, or is there any fundamental difference between these?
Can you please repeat your question? I couldn't hear you properly.
Dr. Francis, yeah, Dr. Francis, if Dr. Agrawal, with your permission, if I can mention again, Dr. Francis, Dr. Agrawal is wanting to know, is there any fundamental difference between the federated search and discovery and universal search? Is there any fundamental difference between federated search or discovery and universal search? Is there any difference, or are they synonyms? Is it the same thing that we relate to?
Okay, now I never mentioned about federated search in my talk. What I've mentioned was federated access. Okay. Now federated access is one wherein now all federated access use the single sign-on technology. Okay. Now I told you what is a single sign-on. Okay. Now single sign-on can be limited to an organization. Now I gave you an example. I logged into my email server, and then all the other services offered on the IISc network, okay, and which require authentication and which are integrated with single sign-on. Then if I have implemented single sign-on, then I don't need to individually log into other services. So one login will take care of all the other logins required to access on a specific network within an organization. Now, if the same seamless access is required across the organization, for example, from our library or from our institute, when people access various publishers, okay, through Shibboleth IDP, and when they authenticate themselves with our email server, then when they access various publishers A or publishers B or whoever it is, they don't need to log in again and again. So that is what is federated access. So federated access is extending the single sign-on across the boundary of an organization. Okay. Now federated search is one. For example, that there are specific tools. Okay. Now you enter a search term. Okay, you enter a search term. Okay, now what the federated search does, it searches across the various resources and then gives a single list in a specific ranked order or whatever the order is, and then it shows the results. Okay, so federated search, it searches across the databases and then gives a unified list. That is federated search. So
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. Thank you so much indeed. Now we have, before I ask Mr. Ravi T to ask his question, this is just a quick thing for Mr. Prasada Rao Chetam to convey to him that we are not able to give you an audio control since there is no audio device which is appearing in this connection with you. So our apologies, we can't really give you an audio control to ask. You can post your question in the chat box. Now I'm requesting Mr. Ravi T to kindly ask his question to our distinguished speaker. It's over to you, Mr. Ravi. Mr. Ravi T. Ravi, you're connected right now. You may ask your question. Mr. Ravi T, if you may like to ask your question, you may kindly do that. I think there's some connection issue with him. I'm going now to Rizwana Sheikh. Ms. Rizwana Sheikh, Rizwana, could you please unmute yourself? I have unmuted you. Mrs. Rizwana Sheikh, Rizwana, could you please unmute yourself if you may like to ask a question? Rizwana is not able to do that. Let me move now from R to S. We have S. Padmavati. This is S. Padmavati who is interested to ask a question. Mrs. S. Padmavati, could you please unmute yourself? Mrs. S. Padmavati, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question? You're also not able to unmute yourself. There is an icon of microphone which appears on the right side on your screen. This is for Dr. Savita Pradhan. Dr. Savita, there is no audio device which is shown in your connection, so I can't give you an audio control. We have Mr. Shivendra Shekhar who is interested to ask a question. Mr. Shivendra Shekhar, please unmute yourself and ask your, yes, we are connected, Mr. Shivendra.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening,
Please ask your question.
sir. Ma'am, I am the student of Central University of Tamil Nadu in MLIS. So, ma'am, this Shibboleth is used for us, ma'am. Is it good for us? Can we use this?
This entire, yeah, Dr. Francis, please.
Yeah, Mr. Shivendra, you said you are a student or you are a working professional?
Sir, I am the student of Central University of Tamil Nadu, sir.
Okay,
First year student, sir.
You're still a student. Okay, you are still a student.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's a good software as far as the library is concerned, because the libraries will be able to facilitate seamless access to subscribed online resources, especially when the users are away from the campus, and the users will be able to use the subscribed resources through any of the smart devices, and all that they need to have is one email credentials with which the Shibboleth IDP server interacts to authenticate a user. So as long as that is there, then Shibboleth is surely a good software, and because there is no, it's an open source software, there is no recurring cost is involved, and the infrastructure needed to set up Shibboleth IDP is also minimal, and it's a win-win situation as far as the libraries and the end users of the subscribed resources are concerned.
Thank you so much, Dr. Francis. Thank you indeed. I'm now going to Mr. Sridhar R. Sridhar R, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Mr. Sridhar R, could you please, yes, we are connected, Mr. Sridhar. Kindly ask your question.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Please
Hello.
ask your question.
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, good evening, Sridhar.
What about the free resources? Can we use this using this Shibboleth?
Sir, can you just repeat the question, sir? What is
free resources available in the open now? Free e-resources.
Yes, sir. As far as free resources are concerned, then you don't need any kind of authentication. Now, this is only in the context of subscribed content which is expected to be used only by the authorized users of an organization. Okay, so only then this comes into play. So if it is a free, then you can access it from anywhere, from any device, and there is no restriction because it is open access. Even scholarly content that is open access on the publisher's platform, you don't need any sort of authentication whatsoever. Okay, you can just download it wherever you are from.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. We have Dr. Vinay Kanthola, the librarian at NIT University, Neemrana, who may like to ask a question. Yes, Dr. Vinay, we are connected. Please kindly ask your question.
Good evening, everyone. So during this difficult time, a talk on this topic is a very good initiative by DELNET. So the talk was informative and interesting. So thanks to DELNET and Dr. Francis. Ma'am, actually, I would like to tell you that we were also using VPN-based access pre-COVID, as the campus is fully residential. Okay, therefore VPN-based access was serving our purpose, but the COVID-19 situation forced us to implement remote access tool. We implemented Shibboleth at NIT University successfully, and it is working smoothly. Okay, and we have provided access through our Koha OPEC. That is a different thing. But actually, I had 3 points which I would like Dr. Francis to answer. The first point is that don't you think that the VPN-based access is too costly, as it requires lots of licenses? Instead, we should go for a remote access tool. And second is that, which is very important, could you brief me about SOS, single sign-on, and its requirements? Because actually we are not able to access all the subscribed databases with the help of one login. Every time our user require login and password. With the help of login password, they access each and every databases. Okay, and the third one is that we have also configured the open source software at the Shibboleth portal, and however we are not able to track the usage record. Is there any way, with the help of that particular system or any add-on, we can track the usage of that open source e-contents also? So
okay, okay, I'm not sure whether I'll be able to, I will be able to recollect all the questions, so we'll go one at a time.
Number one, yeah, the first one, whether VPN, because VPN is a costly solution, don't you feel that we should go for a remote access?
Okay. Yeah, see, we have also been using VPN for a long time, and we continue to use it. So the VPN server is being maintained by our IT departments. I'm not I have no idea about the cost involved, the number of licenses that we have, and what's the AMC charges and all. But yes, it is a commercial product, and then there will be AMC involved in it, and then we also need to pay for the licenses. But how the package is bundled, I'm not sure. Okay, but every time when you need to enhance the number of licenses, surely the cost is going to go up. And then when you want to sustain those number of licenses year on year, then we need to keep a recurring payment will be involved. So VPN is, I mean, it involves money. And then, but then the other VPN has been in use for almost more than 20 years now. Okay, now during those days there were no other Shibboleth and all single sign-on based Shibboleth federated access involved in the last decade or so, little more over that. So prior to that, we had no option. The only choice that the library had was to implement either VPN or go through the EZ proxy. Okay, so both any commercial product that you implement, definitely there's going to be a recurring cost factor associated with it. So that is one part. Okay. So can I know the second question, please?
Yeah, the second question is, Dr. Francis, what are the requirements for the single sign-on process? What are the requirements? What are the prerequisites?
Okay.
And
so now you mentioned that you raised the point that your users need to log in with a different set of credentials to access a different databases. Okay. Now you need to check with your publishers, database publishers. Okay. Whether now you also said that your institute already is using the Shibboleth IDP to facilitate remote access to various subscribed resources. Now you need to check with your publisher whether the databases that they publish is accessible through the Shibboleth IDP. So if it is accessible through Shibboleth IDP, then there is no need for individual set of credentials to access different databases. The fact that your institute or your users are using different sets of login credentials to access different databases, it implies that those databases are not Shibboleth compliant. If they are Shibboleth compliant, then you can ask the publisher to give the Shibboleth enabled URL, so that you can implement that as a part of your page, which lists all the Shibboleth enabled resources, and users will be able to follow the link, and then their official email credentials should be good enough to access those databases, provided those databases are accessible or Shibboleth compliant. You need to check with your publisher.
Yeah, Dr. Francis, thank you. And the third and the last question from Dr. Vinay was about the usage report.
Okay. Now Shibboleth IDP by itself does not give any facilities to track the usage. So I showed you a screen wherein we were able to get some metrics about the usage of Shibboleth IDP, and that's a tool that has been developed by the InfluentNet team, and that has been integrated with our Shibboleth IDP. So using that extra tool, which is not part of the Shibboleth IDP, we are able to get some usage metrics about our Shibboleth IDP.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. Thank you so much. With your permission of our speaker, I'm quickly going once again from A to Z to ensure that no one's queries remains unanswered. And we have Ms. Akanksha, who is interested to ask a question. Akanksha, quickly, please unmute yourself if you may like to ask a question. You have raised your digital hand. Please unmute yourself, Akanksha, quickly. I would just say the name once again. And if not, then we will just move to the next attendee who may like to ask a question. I believe you are not able to do that. So quickly moving now, once again, glancing through the list. From A, I'm moving now and seeing if there are any question, and quickly then we will have a look at the chat box once again. We have Dr. Mamta, you have already asked a question. I believe it was I didn't lower the digital hand, and that's how it's appearing again. We'll just quickly be seeing if there are any questions. We have Mr. Johnson A, who is interested to ask a question. Johnson A, Mr. Johnson A, yes, we are connected, Mr. Johnson. Go ahead and ask the question.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Sir, I am from Infant Jesus College of Engineering. We are making our library as a computerized one. Earlier, we used as a manual one. If will you recommend Shibboleth Shibboleth software to install it to make the library as a remote source?
No, see, Shibboleth IDP software is meant for specific purpose. Now, suppose if your library is subscribing to various online resources, and if these online resources from the various publishers, okay, and if you want to facilitate access remotely, then the Shibboleth software will serve the purpose. Now, in order to make your library to make your library migrate from manual to automated. Now, first of all, you need to install library management software. Are you using any library management software, like for example Koha or any other software?
I think Dr. Francis, we would like to request Mr. Johnson, because he belongs to our member institution. Mr. Johnson, you can always get in touch with us, as DELNET does assist the libraries in providing a free library automation software. We also assist the libraries for adoption of Koha. So if you are interested, please do kindly get in touch with us, as you belong to our member institution, and we will be very, very happy to be of any assistance to you. Dr. Francis, we have now MS Chandrasekharan, who may want to ask you a question. Mr. MS Chandrasekharan, I'm sorry we are taking much of your time, Dr. Francis.
No problem.
And
No
yeah,
problem.
thank you so very much for being so very kind and accommodative. We have Mr. MS Chandrasekharan. Mr. MS Chandrasekharan, quickly unmute yourself and you may ask a question. Mr. MS Chandrasekharan, could you please? Yes, we are connected.
I am there, madam. I am there. Okay. I am using Modern Lib as my library software. Okay. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we are able to hear you. We are able to hear you, Mr. Chandrasekharan.
I have not attended your this thing from right from the beginning. Okay. I'm sorry for that. I just wanted to mail your things to me so that I can go through it and see to it.
Sure.
I'm sorry that.
Being recorded, Dr. Kaul will share the.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for Mr. Chandrasekharan for reminding us to convey to everyone, to each one of our attendees today, that we are going to share the video recording link of this entire deliberations, the wonderful deliberations that we are having it. You're going to get a link from DELNET and that you can view it. And also you can share it, with your other professional colleagues and also for their IT department and computer science department, so that they can look into that. We have Mr. Manoj Chaudhary, who may like to ask a question. Mr. Manoj Chaudhary, could you please unmute yourself? I have unmuted you from this end. Mr. Manoj Chaudhary, could you please unmute yourself? It seems you may like to ask a question as you have raised your digital hand. Mr. Manoj Chaudhary, last call for you. No, I'm sorry, I have to now move to our next attendee, Meenakshi Sabharwal. Mrs. Meenakshi Sabharwal, Meenakshi, I have unmuted you. This is for Mrs. Meenakshi Sabharwal. Meenakshi, could you please unmute yourself? Mrs. Meenakshi Sabharwal, could you please unmute yourself? I think Meenakshi is not able to do that. Let me just move from M now to, we have Mr. Nagaraja AD. Mr. Nagaraja AD, could you please unmute yourself? Mr. Nagaraja AD, this is yet again, last time also we tried establishing a connection with you. Mr. Nagaraja AD, could you please unmute yourself? If you're not able to, you can just quickly post your question in the chat box. Mr. This is Mrs. Parveen Kaur may like to ask a question. Mrs. Parveen Kaur, I have unmuted you. Please unmute yourself. Mrs. Parveen Kaur, if you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself. Parveen is not able to do. Let me just move from. This is again for Mr. Prasada Rao Chele. There is no audio device, Mr. Prasada Rao Chele. I can't give you an audio control, can't even try, because there's no audio device which is connected. S. Padmavati, Mrs. S. Padmavati, this is yet again, you have raised again your digital hand, yet again trying to establish a connection with you. Mrs. S. Padmavati, could you please unmute yourself? No, not able to do that. From S. Savita Pradhan, this is for you, Dr. Savita. There is no audio device. There is no audio device which is being shown. You can post your question quickly in the chat box, because we are taking much of the time of our expert speaker today, and we really don't want to keep him on hold for long. So quickly would like to request those of you who have not been able to get connected in the audio, you can quickly pose a question. And here goes a very quick check at the chat box if there are any questions that okay, this has been a couple of questions has already been being asked. Video recording thing we are going to share with each one of you. There is a question from Mr. Anup Jawale, Dr. Francis, saying that is there any restriction about the languages in this? Means the kind of a content which can get authenticated. Are there any restrictions that is it only for English content, or is it for any of the Indian journals content which can get authenticated? Any inputs from you?
I think that should not come in the way. Language should not come in the way, as long as the content provider makes the content Shibboleth enabled. It should not matter. The language should not matter.
Thanks, Dr. Francis. This is Dr. Francis, Mr. Rajesh Kumar from Himachal Pradesh, and he has posted a question saying that how to implement this software in my college small library collection. I'm from a library in Himachal Pradesh, Mr. Rajesh Kumar. For a small library, he's wanting to know, can he implement this?
Yeah, Mr. Kumar, if I understand your requirement correctly, see, you would like to implement the software that we have been talking about, that is Shibboleth IDP. It's relevant only when you are subscribing to online resources for which authorized users are expected to use, and such subscribed resources should be Shibboleth enabled. So only then it makes relevant to have an IDP server. Okay. Now you're saying that yours is a small library, and I mean, if your requirement is library automation, probably I think Dr. Kaul will be able to help you better in automating your library. That should be the first step that you should undertake.
Thank you very much. Herein goes yet another question for you, Dr. Francis, and this is from Mr. Jagdish Prasad, who is a librarian at IHMR Delhi, and he's wanting to know that, sir, I just want to know very specifically that whether Shibboleth remote access installation is easy, or do we need to require any special technical support from any online or offline experts?
Yes, so as I said, the implementation of the software itself is not very difficult, but then configuring the software, you definitely need to have support from your IT team, because it's not a self-contained service. Okay, so because you need to depend on your email service provider, you need to depend on the federation service provider. Okay, so there is quite a bit of configuration that needs to be done on the software itself, and then that has to be done in coordination with your network support team, and also with the federation with whom I mean, as of now we have only one federation, so you need interaction with the infeed and also with your network support team. So yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. Yet another, it is more a request coming in for you now, and this is from Mr. Manjunatha from Jyoti Nivas College in Bangalore, requesting you, sir, is it possible to create a detailed step-by-step video with a practical explanation, which will be very, very helpful for beginners. So enough of the, here's, all of us knows that how much of effort you have given, for today's webinar and sensitizing, and this really is something everyone is feeling inspired to use this. So
Okay.
any plans of yours, Dr. Francis, if you may like to apprise us, any plans of yours to create a kind of a small video presentation on this?
Yeah, I think such a video should already be available. Now let me dig into it, do some Googling, and then find out. If I come across, I'm sure there are plenty of material already available. I will share with Dr. Kaul, and she in turn can share it with all the members.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Francis. This is a question which is being asked by at least 3 or 4 of our attendees, and I think that's being also asked in the audio mode also. And many of them are wanting to know that can we integrate the open source resources, but as you have said, they don't require any authentication. But I think that's, not many of them, nearly 3 or 4 have even posted this in the chat box saying that, sir, can we put this in the IDP? The open access resources. But maybe perhaps what I feel is, Dr. Francis, that they may be wanting to know, sometimes they have created a subject gateways, they have just created separate links. And now they're just wanting if their users can go to all of those resources together, but then they have to harvest that metadata firstly and then create a link. Because what they're wanting is that rather than a user going to 50 different open access resources, if the authentication, but ultimately, no, again, I think that may not.
Because, madam, these resources are available from different sources. So we can't aggregate those contents.
Yes, yeah. Unless and until they are from OAI, and then they have to harvest and then through different mechanisms.
Even if it is OAI compliant, you can get only the metadata, that's all.
Metadata, exactly. Yes. I think that's, I think we are towards now the end of this wonderful webinar. It was truly an enriching session. And I think all of us have many takeaways from this session, which has been made possible only because of the presence of Dr. Francis Jayakanth, who was very gracious and kind in sharing his expertise. And we could notice that from the overwhelming response, nearly 2,052 participations till the very last moment when we started off, at 3 o'clock, we received it. A large number of participants across India and outside, they attended the session. And Dr. Francis, on behalf of DELNET, on behalf of each one of our attendees, you have been really able to create a kind of sensitizing them to the core, wherein everyone is really feeling inspired enough that they may like to try their hands in implementing it to the best of their capacities in their own institutions. And we could notice that also that not many of our professional colleagues have been knowing about this open source tool, which is being available. And so what do you feel, Dr. Francis, as the last question from the organizer DELNET, what do you feel DELNET should do in order to help the institutions, especially for the implementation of Shibboleth and helping the institutions for this remote access? What do you feel? What would you like to advise us at DELNET?
Okay, a great question, madam. So what I would suggest DELNET can do is DELNET can set up a IDP server on behalf of its member institutions, and then DELNET can also run its LDAP server, wherein it can do the authentication, so that it eliminates the individual libraries to have their own authentication system. So DELNET can centrally set up an authentication system and also implement IDP, Shibboleth IDP. So this way, the member institutions will be able to access subscribed online resources through DELNET using the IDP servers set up by the DELNET, and also the authentication also happens at the DELNET end instead of happening at the individual member libraries. So I think that's one thing that DELNET can explore, setting up an IDP server and also an authentication system.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Jayakanth. We can't really thank you enough, and indeed remain truly grateful to you for your time and efforts in being there. And you are always a great supporter of DELNET, which we greatly value. On behalf of DELNET and on behalf of each one of our attendees who has truly felt benefited, from the deliberations today, this is a small memento we would like to present, and we are going to send it across to you through courier, which will reach you. And we really look forward to the times when we can meet and can invite you in person to deliver the talks. And it indeed has been a great pleasure for us. And please accept this as a token of our very warm, sincere gratitude to you for your very gracious presence and for sharing your vast expertise, with each one of us on this online platform.
Thank you very much, madam. I'm greatly honored, and Once again, from the bottom of my heart, I express my sincere gratitude to you and all your colleagues for giving me this opportunity to share my experience. And I'm amazed by the amount of energy that you possess. It's really inspiring. Thank you so much, ma'am.
It's a profound pleasure. It's a profound pleasure, Dr. Francis. We are certainly going to have you back again, maybe as being also suggested by many of our professional colleagues, that we may like to have some workshops, some more better insights, practical insights we can think about, because we would really like to have, the continuity of our association, and you're enormously contributing to this. And there's a greater need that we should try to let these institutions a little more hand-holding to happen. And we would like to assure you and also our attendees that DELNET would sincerely try our best at what we can offer in this direction also for our institutions, because it's not just simply helping the libraries, it's helping the user who is in need. It's also would definitely, as you showed, that 20% increased usage of your resources happened once you implemented Shibboleth right from March 2020 to where you stand now. And that would also help in the optimum utilization of resources. So definitely DELNET is going to work in this direction. So thank you very much, Dr. Francis, once again, on behalf of DELNET and each one of us for being there. We also would like to thank each one of our attendees comprising of our eminent library professionals, colleagues, also the colleagues from the IT departments, computer science departments, our young students who have been there, not only from the departments of library and information science, also from the departments of computer science. Each one of you have made the difference today, and let's collectively work together. And let's also try to see if any one of you, as we could see that we had Dr. Vinay Kantola who was mentioning about that they have also implemented it at NIT University. Let's try to create the best practices being adopted across the institutions, and let's all of us come together to help all of us. So let's create, if someone has done something which has not been replicated and someone else wants to do that, let's create a platform wherein everyone feels to be in a win-win situation, and let's help each other. Let's try to learn from others who have already implemented and have done something, because we have a very common goal, we have a very common purpose for which we are there, and that is to serve our users. And this definitely, since it belongs to an open source community, let's keep our initiatives also open. Let's have an open collaborations and ensuring that we are able to take the steps together in order to have a more wider kind of reach and a coverage. It has truly been a great honor and pleasure for DELNET in organizing this, and it has been a great honor for us to have our distinguished speaker, Dr. Francis Jayakanth. We are going to remember and cherish your association. We always remain grateful to you, and you have always so very kind. Whenever I have seen it, I have contacted you, right, and Dr. Call, long time association, and you have been always so very supportive of DELNET right from the very initial days of DELNET. We indeed remain much grateful to you. This reminds us of Dr. Rajshekhar's. You have been the one who has worked very, very closely with him during the NCSI days. And we indeed really feel grateful for all the wonderful support and kindness that you have always been showering on us. So thank you very much, Dr. Francis. We really look forward to having many more deliberations with you in the days to come. And we would once again like to thank each one of you for being there with us this afternoon. As being mentioned earlier, we are going to send it to you, the video recording, because the recording would take time. We will try to make it sure that you receive this recording on Monday in all circumstances. Each one of you would receive that with the permission of our speaker. We are going to share the link of that. Also would like to tell you that by 5:30, it's yet another 10 minutes time, you're going to receive the certificate of participation of being such a wonderful part of this wonderful deliberations that we had. And that is as a token of a warm appreciation for being there, not just simply as an attendee. Your presence has truly been acknowledged and appreciated by each one of us. You really made the difference of being so interactive. And that's the real beauty of being in an online platform. platform. So remain communicative, remain conscious of what you can do, what has not been done, how we can come together and bridge up the gap areas and address them together. That remains. And thank you very much for being a wonderful part of this library networking. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Jayakanth. It has been a great honor and pleasure. And thank you so very much once again, each one of you. I would also like to thank my own colleague, Mr. Kushal Giri Goswami, who has been technically coordinating our webinars. I truly appreciate his support. So thank you so very much once again. It has been a great pleasure for us in organizing the webinar on remote access to e-resources using Shibboleth and open source software. And our distinguished speaker made the difference, and it has truly been an afternoon which we are going to remember forever. Thank you so much once again, each one of you. Stay happy, stay safe, do stay connected, and we really look forward to having many more interactions with you in the days to come. Thank you very much. Thank you. God bless each one of you. Thank you.
And thank you for all the patience hearing of the audience. And it was quite
Thank you very much, Dr. Francis. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. God bless you all. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.